to another episode of Money for Nothing, the podcast about music and capitalism. Before we get started today, I think that Sam and I wanted to just make a statement about the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly, like, as a Jewish American, just been, like, an absolutely incredibly upsetting, tragic couple of weeks as just, like, violence has, like, spun out of control. And this is not, like, something this podcast focuses on, but we just want to, like, add our voices to the calls for a ceasefire, that no one should be killed and punished for the actions of another, and, like, that any loss of life is clearly horrific, but, like, the best way to prevent tremendous, horrific losses of life right now is for a ceasefire, and that seems to be the only thing that makes any sense.
100% agree with that sentiment. So awkwardly, moving on to the show, we are putting the Money for Nothing magnifying glass on Electric Zoo, or E-Zoo.
E-Zoo, baby!
As the kids call it, apparently. And a bit of a debacle that went down this past summer in New York.
I have friends, close friends, shout out to Caitlin Turner, who I didn't realize but has been going to E-Zoo since it started, like, for the last decade, and was kind of bummed was bummed that she was traveling internationally during this year's festival, and the level of, like, schadenfreude delighted that she was when I was talking with us about her. She's like, yeah, man, it was really bad last year, and I was just like, this year I don't know, but then I was out of town and I don't know, and glad I didn't go.
yeah it was so needless to say,
if you haven't followed,
Electric Zoo once again had a little trouble this past summer, and once again finds itself in hot water with
everyone.
The long-running summer weekend music festival had to cancel its first day.
Not just cancel its first day, had to cancel its first day hours before it was set to start, saying that they hadn't finished building the stage because of, quote, global supply issues. Which, like,
right.
is...
And then later blamed the New York City for not giving it its permits quick enough.
Yeah.
Which, like, insiders were like, unofficially, like off the record, like, that's bullshit. And so then, I guess...
On the record, we're like, that's bullshit.
Yeah, unnamed, maybe. Unnamed, yeah. And then, so the first day gets canceled, and then it decides to oversell the show by 7,000 tickets. Now, the capacity for the event was already 42,500. And so we did a little math, and that's like 16% oversell. And that also includes a gate crashing incident involving an estimated 1,500 people. Let's just say that E-Zoo was a fucking mess.
I was kind of following it on Twitter as it was happening. Well, so basically what happened was that, like, first day's canceled. Everyone's bummed because they're like, yeah, you'll get money back. But, like, they did not feel, probably, like, a lot of people did not believe, probably accurately, that they were going to get money back. So then people, this is
Also, my heart goes out to the people who had, like, just done whatever their drug of choice is and then found out that it was canceled.
Yeah.
Bummer.
No, it's also... Or, like, depending on the drug, like, not bummer. You'll be fine, right?
True,
like, you
fair,
meant to go
fair.
to the dance club, but now you're gonna just feel...
You can go dance elsewhere.
Like that.
Right.
You can just feel like that in your apartment. And you know what? You'll have a nice time. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. No, so then, like, there were these insane lines, right, to get in, because, again, this was being run incredibly poorly, and people had ordered tickets to be delivered to their houses, and then a lot of people didn't get the tickets delivered in time, and so they were put to will call. So there was this enormous will call line, and you saw these Twitter horror stories of these people being like, I got here at 5.
Oh my God.
It is 9 and I am still in line because there's like 2 people working at the
Jesus.
Will Claw ticket line. So, and right, this is an evening dance event, right? With a curfew, unlike a club, or I mean, clubs have curfew, but they can go much later. So like people were getting there, you know, it was a very specific, you know, you want to be there at the nighttime during the, you know, not right. So there's all this like there's a specific set of temporal dimensions, I'd imagine, with a dance music festival. Yeah, and so then as people have been in line for hours, legitimate ticket holders who had paid money for the ticket, all of a sudden, like a text message / announcement goes out, which is that they've hit capacity. And that's the crazy thing, right? It's not just that. It's not like it's not like something happened and they couldn't let people in. Is that they just go, oops, we've hit capacity, which if you purchased a ticket for the event, you'd think that you were safe to, you know, attend the event. So they like release a message saying, surprise, we've hit capacity, which in retrospect we learned surprise because they wildly oversold the event, which, sidebar, I feel like it's breaking the cardinal rule of overselling an event. I feel like there's two ways to do this is kind of a goofy take, but like there's two ways to do event-based corruption. One, or events, right? One is you sell the tickets that you're. That's incorrect, dear listeners. There's definitely more than two ways to do events-based corruption. But like either I would argue you sell tickets that exist for the event, or you oversell tickets and then cram people in a dangerous and potentially like life-threatening way. The choice to like oversell the event but then not honor all the tickets is like a unique circle of hell. It's a particularly weird choice. And like usually like if you're going to do it, like just if you're going to do the crime, just like do the crime, doing like half the crime is just it's just like it's kind of cringe to be honest.
It's pretty funny. I mean,
I assume it's because marshals appeared and we're like counting. We're like, you can't let anyone else in.
Which we don't know, but considering the people that now own Electric Zoo, which we'll be on to in a minute, it wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of checks and balances by the local or state government coming through. But like, I want to get your opinion though on this like particular form of fuck you, because you know, in Berlin, you can buy tickets to an event at a club and they get turned away at the door because of your dress code.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just like, well then, and I don't know if you can get refund. I'm sure I don't think you can, but I'm sure some of our listeners would know more than me. I tend to show up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday.
But like, I feel like that's a weird thing where like there's always reasons that you could get kicked
or not
out
be allowed
of
in,
an event, right? Like, or not be allowed in. You're too drunk. You're like, there's like that. I feel like in a weird way, like that's like,
yeah.
That's a clauses stuff, right? Like you got to be this, you got to be. It's like you can have a reservation at a restaurant, but if you're wearing shorts, like they're like, I'm sorry, we just don't let you in.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, okay.
But like this was not. They were turning people away for like. And this is, I think, the difference between U.S. and European rave cultures. Like, they weren't turning people away for being too tacky at EZU. God bless the ravers. Yeah, God bless the ravers. And they're just, like, gloriously American refusal to give a single fuck. Like, that's not how this culture works. In some ways, it's a lot more egalitarian, you know? Anyone can come dressed whatever kind of sparkle fairy they want to be. And just like have a whatever time.
Yeah. There's definitely like a divide in Berlin that we don't need to get into. But so there's the dress in all black clubs, and then there's the Sparkle Fairy clubs. Anyway, so they get a text message, and then people are like,
and people are like, I've been in line for 4 hours, and then I think they do the very natural thing, which is like the people at the front are like, if we run right now, I bet we can still get in. Which was correct.
Yeah. And apparently like 1,500 of them got in, estimated by the NYPD.
Have you ever been to a crowd rush, Saxon?
You mean been in a crowd rush?
Yeah, been in a crowd rush.
It feels like I have, but not that I can remember.
I've only seen it. It was very... Okay, so this is a deep cut story, but so there was a famous incident at my university when I was there. A famous, like, to me. It's the worst show of all time. So basically, this might get deep, but basically there was a fund that the university that they gave to organizations that brought bands to campus every year. There was a fund. It wasn't. Well, I have no idea how much money it was, but it wasn't a huge budget, but it was some, right?
So who they bring?
Well, so usually they gave it to the like weird elitist hipster frat who, while iffy in many ways, fair's fair, had excellent taste in music, and they used that money to bring like a ton of weird little bands. Like the biggest band they would bring would be like Lightning Bolt, but it would also be like, I saw like this like European, like Danish avant black metal band where like the show went on an hour and a half late because they were spending all this time tuning their water jugs. Like it was sick. It was sick when they finally played, but so anyway, they normally spend all this money on like a ton of tiny little bands. But like there was this movement in campus from like a couple of people who were like this like try to like seize the power from this kind of incestuous cohort of hipsters and like throw a show for everyone. And so they managed to do like a coup in the like student committee that put on this festival. This is all my understanding. If someone who went to Wesleyan graduated from Wesleyan in 2011 wants to correct my record on this, please feel free to do so.
And then they did the coup because they wanted like I don't know what year this would be. They wanted like Fun to play or something. I don't know.
It's so you're on the right track. But so what they took is they took all of the money and they blew it all. this coup group on Modest Yahoo and Chitty Bang.
Well, he doesn't have that far of a drive, I guess, if he's living in Brooklyn.
Well, yeah, no, but do you remember Chitty Bang, dude?
Like barely. Like I think like barely.
This isn't the Asher Roth files. Like
ooh, should we play it? I might like it.
So they blew all the money on Modest Yahoo and Chitty Bang, and they put it all in the hockey rink, which was no one had ever done a show there the whole time I was there, I don't think, and it sounded like absolute shit. And everyone was like sitting there, and there were like floor seats like right up front, which I guess cost more, and then like everyone was in the like bleachers, like increasingly being like, this fucking sucks. And they had security guys, but it's a hockey rink, so like the only thing separating the bleachers and the floor seats is like that like waist high barrier. So they had these security guys who were like blocking it, and then like one person ran and like got past, and then like another person ran and got past, and then all of a sudden there was this moment, when like everyone realized it was funny. It's funny when human beings are clearly pack animals. Everyone realized if we all run now, they can't stop all of us. In fact, they won't stop any of us, and just the entire concert, boom, was on the floor. Which they all fit because no one wanted to see Modest Yahoo and Chitty Bang for easily the worst show I've ever seen.
In a hockey rink in Wesleyan.
Wow,
legendary.
But like, again,
I hope somebody got like a recording from the
sounded so bad. It was all rafters. No, and like I imagine a similar thing happened there, where there's all these people, and from reports, a similar thing did happen at Izu, right? That all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, we're gonna be turned away.
Fuck this.
Yeah. And just, which is like not, and as we'll talk about later, like bad. It's bad because
it's dangerous.
Because it's super dangerous,
and it's like
people got hurt,
and easily preventable.
Yeah, easily preventable, and people got hurt. Not badly, thank goodness, but like it could have been way worse. There's a lot of people there.
Well, I'm glad that the people that did Gate Rush were safe and got to see. I'm looking at the lineup, and I know none of these names. Okay, never mind. Okay, but got to see their DJ of choice. So like so how did this all fucking happen? This like long running electronic music festival in New York. How did this happen? Well, as it turns out, those behind the overselling of tickets and this whole debacle was none other than Avant Gardner, a 8,000 person capacity complex in Williamsburg that has quite the history of basically doing a lot of shady shit and pissing off the city and state of New York continually, including, surprise, 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 at their own fucking venue, regularly overselling tickets. Upwards of one article I read said that they sometimes oversell tickets up to 33% at their venue. So, as I mentioned, Avant Gardner has this whole history of safety problems and issues. But who the fuck are they? Are they just a bunch of jabronis who don't know how to run a business? Well,
listener, the answer is yes.
But they're not local.
No,
it's two
yeah.
Swiss businessmen and in the names of Billy Bildstein and banker Philip Wiedeker, who both co-founded Avant Gardner in 2017. So we'll get into Billy Bildstein and Philip Wiedeker in a minute, but I think it's probably important that we just like zoom out a little bit and mention that like Electric Zoo wasn't like this like well-oiled running machine before Avant Gardner took over. The original founders were two local people from Long Island.
Yeah. It's a husband and wife team. Mike Bindra and Laura De Palma from Long Island City, Queens.
And it basically grew into like one of like the most well-known, like biggest brands of like EDM, at least here in the States. I mean, I'm sure it's well-known across like Europe as well.
And I think that it's this funny thing, right? Where when you get a little bit of this is that it's hard to think back given how much EDM has changed and exploded and kind of institutionalized in an American context over the past decade plus, right? But like in the early 2010s, like dance music was still pretty new in an American context.
Sure.
Right? Like, I mean,
there have been raves
in a complicated way.
The 90s, but like
there have been raves since the 90s. There had been clearly the origins of this music are in Chicago and Detroit.
Sure.
Disco,
going back even farther before that, yeah.
Right, but in terms of the trajectories of the modern industry and the modern style, right, you get this very kind of classic transatlantic story where these African-American, black forms develop in the U.S., make their way over to Europe, where they're transformed and then sold back to America. I mean, it's the British invasion, the next,
that's a good
redux.
Way of putting it, yeah.
Right. And in particular, I think that while there had been kind of big 90s rave stuff and, like Michelangelo Manos has some really cool writing about this. Various people have done good scholarship on this. But like for this current generation, I mean, like day zero is dubstep in many ways. Right. That for the first you get in the like right around, 2008, 2009, 2010, you get this music that is aggressive enough, stadium enough, wild enough to kind of explode into America. And so there is this thing where like, there hadn't been much, there had been like the older version of the scene, but like for a certain generation, like millennial generation, like it explodes in popularity around 2010, 2011, 2012. And so you can have this thing where like a local promoter, like there wasn't a big dance music infrastructure in New York. There were none of the Brooklyn clubs in like a mainstream oriented, well-oiled way. There was like Webster Hall, there was Pasha. I'm sure there were others, but
some
like
came and go.
That was kind of it. Others came and go, but in terms of like big clubs, and a lot of those were still like, I'm like very like kind of like bridge and tunnel oriented.
Yeah,
in their vibe. Yeah, and so like there was this space where like a local organization could come up, throw a thing in New York City, and then become increasingly central to this like broader economic, this broader geography of dance music festivals. And clearly like they made enough money that then a bunch of other festivals that had previously been, coming out of the jam scene, like Bonnaroo or indie rock, like Coachella, Lollapalooza, start moving more into dance music. then you get the kind of the Vegasization of everything in like the mid 2010s, where all of a sudden you get like high end clubs that start developing there to bring in millennial audiences, and then kind of like go back out. And then so all of a sudden by late 2010s, you have this space where EZU is still around, but all of a sudden there's like a lot more cultural interest in this space and financial interest in this space.
So yeah, I mean, so basically, yeah, definitely. And so basically, like, Electric Zoo really kind of blows up and becomes like a mainstay in New York. It eventually gets bought out by SFX Entertainment, which fucking goes under.
And SFX is his own weird story, right? So they get bought out by SFX, and SFX is this a project of Robert FX Sillerman, who was one of the kind of initial movers and shakers in the live music industry in the 90s, and helped to kind of build out the infrastructure that would become Live Nation. And my understanding, I didn't look into all the corporate ins and outs, but I think that like got bought out or left and like was no longer, had a fabulously lucrative career, but didn't necessarily was no longer kind of in the driver's seat. And so but was in a position to get a whole bunch of funding, and basically got a ton of funding and said like, dance music is the next concert industry, and said, I know. The interviews are incredible. He's like, I know nothing about this, and that is why that's why I'm gonna triumph. Which is,
I know, these quotes are amazing.
He's like, I love it. People say bippity boppity, and I say, I don't know what that means. Here's $1 million, pal.
He's like, I love it.
And yeah, basically he like went in and bought up a bunch of clubs.
Yeah,
based
basically
on,
those are the quotes.
Like no understanding of anything. And yeah, it went, and then it like almost immediately went under when it turned out that not knowing anything about your market or what you're selling isn't actually the most efficient way to make money. I mean, again, like it's possible that you could imagine if in a globalized dance music economy, in one where that's much less tied to local dynamics because of the rise of social media, you could imagine that having a chain of dance clubs so that you could book across them would be efficient and like could be a good business. But that wasn't true when he was trying it. It's not even true now, though maybe becoming a little bit more true. And like, but also, yeah, just like didn't make any sense, because when you're coming in with like a huge amount of financing, being like, oh, I don't want to make deals, I just want to get really big really quickly, you end up signing bad deals.
Yeah, that happens. So I mean, basically, like, Electric Zoo, while a popular staple in New York, like has had some troubles. There's been like instances of like overdoses. Now there's like the overselling, all this stuff. It's like its brand is like a little bit tarnished. Like there was like a 2016 article that you sent me that was like, Electric Zoo gets one more chance, like, and obviously it's still going on, so I guess it succeeded in passing that one chance or whatever. Fast forward to where we are now, and the people that own Electric Zoo is Avant Gardner, these two Swiss businessmen that I mentioned earlier, and who basically come out of like some sort of like multi-million-dollar private equity and asset management firms that manage like these massive fortunes of like Zurich's wealthiest companies and families. And for whatever reason, maybe the easing of laws restricting dancing in New York City in the last like 5 years, decided to take on New York City's EDM scene for whatever reason. This led to 2017 Avant Gardner becoming a venue, and it's probably most known for like the Brooklyn Mirage, which is like a 6,000 person capacity mega club in Brooklyn, which I think sits like inside Avant Gardner, and it's organized by a group called City Fox, which is basically just the same dudes behind Avant Gardner. And before we get into Avant Gardner, City Fox itself has a long history with causing some issues, including numerous busts by the New York License Authority for illegally selling liquor. But I think one of the best stories is it comes in 2015, and like this is like unfucking real, but this includes like City Fox actually in 2015 for Halloween tried to throw a rave at a Superfund site in New York City. So check the description from a 2015 DNA Info article. I can't make this shit up. In preparation for international party promoter City Fox's Halloween Rave in 2015, workers at the Newhart Plastics Building, a state-designated Superfund site, cut hoses and tampered with a storage drum, allowing contaminated waste to spew onto the floor, according to a recent consent decree by the Department of Environmental Conservation. Man, if there's nothing I love more is a good toxic waste rave.
I mean, look, it's Halloween themed. Yeah. It's spooky. It's spooky, scary. You know.
So.
They get in there. It's the most like, and up until their opening, it's the most like Fyre Fest vibes stuff. Where basically, and you know what? I take that back because it does disrespect to Fyre Fest.
Which, by the way, is coming back this year. Did you see that?
But no. I want to like. It's not. I did see that.
Yeah.
I did see that. It's there's this crazy, and I think that this is like the core tension that we're going to be getting to, and talking about more in the second half of the episode, which is that's super, like, it's an insane story. They like built a bad stage and like at the Superfund site and like cut tubes that were doing important stuff because it didn't look good, and like all the power was super dangerous, and like and they were supposed to report any changes to this like incredibly toxic place, and then like right before the event, like a New York City worker got in there and was like, holy shit, no, and just like shut it, like hit the big red button that like every New York City like piece of the New York City bureaucracy has somewhere in that office. There's the big red like emergency button. Hit that button and they just shut it down. But like, so as funny and ridiculous as that is, there is something, I think, that there's like this fundamental disjunct that is really troubling in many ways, which is like, what that is at some level is like finance. You could describe it as like finance brain, right? Like literally the idea of financialization in global capitalism is allowing things to be interchangeable and to flow easily and without friction from place to place, right? It's like core neoliberal thinking, right? It's the idea of like rootless cosmopolitanism. It's the idea of quick financial flows. It's the idea of outsourcing. And it's an idea that like, oh, it doesn't actually matter like where this is at some real level. It's just like, because every place is entirely exchangeable with every other place, and every performer is entirely exchangeable with every other performer, and every community is entirely exchangeable to every other community. And when you get in that is like this like hilarious distillation of that idea of like, oh, it doesn't like, you know, like the kind of that the Facebook motto, the early internet, right? Like we move fast and we break stuff, like, but applied not to a like tech platform where it's bad enough, but applied to like an actual physical location where if you just break stuff, like people get hurt. Like if you cut the Superfund pipes, if you like knock over the toxic dump, it's not like every place is every other place. It's not like you can move fast and break shit. Like this isn't online. This is real life. And
yeah, like it runs into like the red tape that actually is like in place to like keep people like, I don't know, fucking alive. And they're like, what?
Yeah,
I mean, and this continues when they open Avant Gardner. They basically
and there's like a long struggle to kind of open Avant Gardner. They like don't have a liquor license, and then they keep having like extra one-off events. They like have a lot of fight with the community that they're in because they just like don't respect noise ordinances. But also like, you know, like some of that, like I'm like, okay, whatever, you know, like allow the kids to party. But I mean, this is like real shit. Like since it's opened, like not only has it been battling the notoriously strict like state liquor license of New York, but there's been like real concerns expressed around overdoses and deaths. And like there's been several kidnappings outside of like the venue, like for people who like attend those events. 2 deaths this summer outside, not just OD deaths, but like murders or suicide, like people found in Newtown Creek, which is like really grim and weird and unclear what happened. Yeah, and so it's not just this like, you know, like bureaucratic red tape of like, oh, you didn't pay your taxes and so we're going to shut you down. It's like there's actually like real safety concerns around like one of the biggest
maybe it is like the biggest sort of club venue in New York, or definitely in Brooklyn. And
And
so
yeah, and just what you were saying, Saxon, I think it is important to say that like New York City does have a notorious and often like racialized set of kind of restrictions and rules around nightlife, right? Like that allow certain which kinds of venues the bureaucracy allows to survive has been used to shut down certainly all kinds of like black cultural life like throughout the history of the city. You've got like the cabaret licensing thing in which is a whole other story, but basically anti-dance legislation that was kind of weaponized against jazz and specifically designed to prevent like cross-racial spaces from developing in New York City in the early 20th century. And that history continues
right.
with the kind of chasing live hip hop out of New York over like the 90s and 2000s, the ways that the police like had like specific dossiers and units like tracking down rappers. Like this is not to like understate the ways in which like state authority has been used in like repressive ways. At the same time, and like you're saying, like of course they're anti like letting the kids dance, and we're I think as a podcast pro letting the kids dance.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, pretty easily.
like that's our stated podcast position. But there also are like this is like grim, but like the ghost ship of it all, right? Like fire codes and like Superfund site regulations and
or like as we've talked about before, like, you know, obviously the Astro World thing and everything is like as well, you know, like these are like things that I'm concerned. And like I think there's like obviously like a lot less sympathy when it's like two Swiss finance bros coming in just like kicking and screaming because like they don't want to follow procedure and like people are being kidnapped out of their fucking venue, versus like a DIY venue that's like a capacity of 500 people being shut down because of like some like racial or like social bullshit.
And it's also I think another thing that's complicated that I mean I think we can get into more later when we think about like the globalization of dance music culture. And I think the question and a lot of the tensions around Avant Gardner prior to this most recent Izu kerfluffle have been around the state kind of state oversight of related to their ability to sell liquor, and the kind of the company that they hired to do so had originally worked to plan the venue, but actually then the venue owners and the security company that was overseeing them like got into increasing like tense interactions, and the security company basically starts saying like this is just the amount of drug use at this venue is like rampant and dangerous. And again, that's another set of like complicated dynamics, right? Because at one level I'm like, let the kids dance and kind of let the kids dance, you know, I'm not a prohibitionist, right? Like let the kids dance means let the kids dance. On the other hand, I do think that there's this less tangible, less bureaucratic question about community, maybe, right? Like there's ways that you can have a place where people go to take drugs and listen to dance music that are more or less safe, and that like where there are sets, and we've talked about this a little bit before, like again, like with questions of like mosh pits, right? Like you can have a culture that encourages like checking in on people and like kind of rules for like how things should go, or you can have like a space with loud music that people go to take drugs in kind of an atomized way, and like those are two very different vibes, and one is more dangerous,
right? And like I mean, you know, obviously in Berlin, obviously like club and drugs go hand in hand, and there's usually like people at the venue that like work for the venue who are like on the lookout for like people who are struggling or overdosing or whatever. And also there is like a culture that's been developed like in that city amongst the people that are attending these events to pay attention to that as well. But I think also I kind of want to go back to this interesting thing about like what you were saying earlier about the sort of frictionless move of capital and this like neoliberal economic paradigm we exist in, and how like when it when it oftentimes bleeds into the government or like the like local authorities. Because what's so interesting about this story is that so Avant Gardner essentially has all these issues which we've been discussing, but then guess who gets elected? Oh, our beloved Eric Adams, former NYPD cop. And I guess Democrat, LOL, soon to be independent probably.
Yeah, it's not a bad call.
Yeah, who personally helped broker a deal recently between the New York mayor and the state liquor authority to help Avant Gardner maintain its liquor license when it was up for renewal this past May. Which, Sam, why would a mayor, in a very rare instance, step in to help a music venue that has had major safety concerns and to help them maintain their liquor license? Well, clearly to support local businesses, right? Or
I mean, Eric Adams famously does love to support local businesses with his patronage.
Or maybe it's because Eric Adams' close friend is Frank Corone, who was the lawyer for Avant Gardner, and now, or before, sorry, who was the lawyer for Avant Gardner before serving as the mayor's chief of staff last year. Oh, funny how these things work.
Well, he does like to patronize businesses that are owned by his close friends.
Oh, I see.
In fairness. And that may or may not pay taxes.
Yeah, right. And so then, of course, this Electric Zoo thing happens, and now, Eric Adams was, whatever, momentarily in hot water. Fingers are being pointed at him for his, close relationship with these people, yada, 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 which we don't need to go into, but, unsurprising. But I do think it's an interesting nugget that just when you start to see this sort of mentality in which you were explaining about this sort of frictionless move of capital and this sort of neoliberal approach, and when you have these businessmen coming in, and then it kind of bleeds into the city and how it's run, and the politics and the politicians and the development of the city, you begin to see shit shows like Electric Zoo to bring a full circle.
It's also thinking about the very specific micropolitics of Adams' relationship to the state liquor board, right? Which is that, and again, this is part of the. It's both we're not again saying that there's anything that resembles corruption here, but that friends helping friends vibes.
Yeah, facts.
But in addition to that, right? In addition to those kind of classic rich people make lots of friends because they're so friendly, and then their friends help them because everyone's just great pals. See our some of our Supreme Court justices.
Yikes.
There's also an interesting again about friction and about governance and about who should govern and how government should work here, which is that this part of Adams' support for Avant Gardner is about the fact that the state liquor board isn't run out of New York City. It's run by New York State.
Exactly.
There's been a long-running series of kind of jurisdictional battles between the mayor of New York and the state of New York, clearly, because it's kind of this weird situation where I guess the governor is more powerful in some ways, but the mayor of New York and the New York City government is this enormous independent organization, right? And so who should run which pieces and how should it all get funded? It's extremely tense. And I think that Adams claimed that the state oversight had been used in the past to kind of was unnecessarily difficult and was being used to quash the evolution of New York nightlife, which is something that he in particular supports. And which is interesting because, again, it's about detaching spaces from the structures of governance that they're in, but also, again, it gets to some of the complexities, not quite multiple, but the sense that this can cut two ways, because at one level, you don't want to say everything should be enmeshed in power structures such that people in upstate New York get to determine what people in New York City are doing. But you also, the problem is when you separate things out like that, when you break things into smaller constitutive pieces, big money can come in, and then big money is bigger in relationship to the smaller pieces and can get its way more in relationship to the smaller pieces than it can in a more cohesively organized, more a larger whole, right? So I can imagine it's easier for Swiss private finance to come in and make some stuff happen in New York City than it is for Swiss finance to come in and make some stuff happen in New York State. It's a bigger boulder to push New York State.
Yeah, that's an interesting divide, but I think it maybe brings up something we want to discuss in the last last third of this show, which is the fact that all of this is also an example of how clubbing has become big business, as a recent resident advisor article put it, and how literally billions of dollars are now being put into like this industry. And I think that that's striking a sort of real divide between maybe some of the more communal, sort of like slightly utopic visions of what like the club scene can and has at times been, versus like this is like another musical touch point for us to like make, for like finance people to make a bunch of fucking money. And I think it also relates, it's complicated too, because like one idea that was put forth in this resident advisor article, which we can go ahead and link to, was that there should be like more like, state funding or government owned or whatever to like spaces that kind of allow for these whatever dance, arts and culture places that isn't just backed by like whatever Swiss financiers. But I think even that becomes a little more complicated when you begin to also like sort of reflect upon like the way that cities are changing, and then like the city governments and how they're wanting to like present the city and everything, which which you're seeing a lot in like Berlin, where you're beginning to see like these clubs and like I've texted with you and David about this, but you're beginning to see the government, obviously there's a lot more funding, and they've been funding. They recently opened, there's a club that opened up in the old Tegel airport. It's called Turbulence or something, and I know. It's fucking so cool. I mean, I haven't been there, so I can't say. But like 6 people, they call them creative independents or whatever, like, are the ones that are like running it, and they got a lot of funding from the state. But you have to do like Tegel is like extremely, extremely far out from like the city center. And meanwhile, in an area in Berlin where there's like a number of clubs like Renate Garden and like Club OST and like About Blank, like the local government is basically building like these massive new office buildings and apartment buildings like right on the river, and then simultaneously they're trying to build like a freeway through this area, which would bulldoze all these clubs.
Right.
So to me, I mean, just to read this, it's like an example of like, finally after fucking 40 years, like the Berlin government being like, okay, like obviously like we're a cultural center and like clubbing is like a huge part of that, but how do we make it clean and safe in a way that we can approve of and keep it on the outskirts while we have like this like safe, like family oriented, maybe finance driven like center of like that isn't, next to an abandoned old train station that there's like a club party going on 72 hours straight. I mean, like, so it's like this tension, like, I don't know, like, I don't really, like, I don't want like the privatized Swiss financiers, but I don't necessarily, and maybe this is my American in me talking, I don't really want like the state funded like club either. It's very complicated.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I think that like, it might be worthwhile just to like, I think just point out the dangers of some of this. Like at one level, it might be impossible to avoid it because if you haven't checked, New York City real estate's expensive, and there've been a couple of examples of places that have been able to like get enough investors to like own their clubs and then kind of like keep them with like a minimal sense of like return on investment, but at the same time, like, it can take finance to open in New York City, to open a venue, like real estate again, like going crazy.
I mean, and some of these and some of these huge clubs in Berlin, even now the prices in Berlin have gone up. And even these huge clubs, like they've been there for like fucking 30 years, so they got in when it was cheap.
Right, and so like there might not be a way to avoid it as like nightlife becomes an increasingly like important part of like as various kinds of prohibitions drop, and it becomes an increasingly important part of like the city's understanding of itself. You also, as you get a generational change. I mean, like thinking about this, like I cannot believe that part of like the financial push into nightlife is not because like the investment bankers who are 40 spent some time, right? The ability they're like spend some time dancing on Molly in their lives, right. And they're like, this is a cool thing to invest in. It's got a lot of cultural cachet, and like, but I guess the thing is that the clear danger for me in this is the potential incompatibilities between a nightlife model and a safety model, let alone like a music model,
Yeah.
right? Like forget
Right.
like sad to say like putting putting like the cultural and aesthetic viability of a dance music scene to the side because like it's still in capitalism and figuring out how you have, I mean, arguably I would say dance music is is better at this than many styles of music, just in that like the originators of various styles, because they can keep spitting new music, can sometimes can continue working in a way that's a lot of times not true in other musics. And certainly there's like multi-generational interactions in dance music that it seems like is not as true in other musical forms. But anyway, putting like how you keep a thriving dance subculture if live music if dance music becomes a big business, like aside, like there's a clear disjunct between just like safety and community safety and money, right? All the things that you would do to maximize the amount of money that you'd get out of a space, some of those are like the classic, like you have VIP sections, I guess, but like a lot of it, especially in the kind of like the more egalitarian vibes of a dance floor, like are things that get dangerous, right? Like emphasizing alcohol sales, emphasizing, pushing more people into rooms, cutting corners wherever you can. And the thing is just that, like, I think at a fundamental level, and we'll see, right? Right now, when you have all this push of private equity into various dance music spots across the world, I mean, my gut is that a lot of that is kind of bubbly in that, like, it seems like it's a great business, but actually, like, it in the history of the last century, like, owning a live music venue can if you do it right be a steady gig, but it tends not to like make hand over fist money forever. Very boom and bust. Clubs open, clubs close, right? There's that's why that like I don't see a fundamental difference that have happened with the rise of dance music that like suddenly changes the basic economics of nightlife in a way that like all of a sudden clubs will now be able to make a lot of money over the long term in a way that makes them a good financialized investment. So what that means is you do, I think, if I'm right? And because I do think it's important to say, I do think it's possible that like it's possible to make a business that makes some profit, enough to stay afloat, enough to like maybe return something to your investors, and like a slow growth model. And you could even imagine, like, it's weird to say like pro SFX, but like a chain of dance music clubs that like tied to like that could potentially work, right? But if you accept that the kinds of returns that investment bankers tend to want aren't gonna happen, what you get is a very, very dangerous set of conditions where the way that you get money is by cutting corners. When the money doesn't roll in the way you want and you still need to show profit, the only way to do that is to reduce costs and increase the amount of income. And the only way you do that is by cutting corners and shoving more people into clubs and events. And what that looks like, Saxon, is Izu, right? What that looks like is selling 7,000 extra tickets on a 42,000 event where 2 years after Astroworld, where you know that if you put too many people in a space without proper safety regulations, you know what can happen. And the way you're doing that because you want to return.
And this is really frustrating for me because I think that like we also, when we did like the episode that was around Ticketmaster and Pearl Jam, we also kind of made the argument, or didn't make the argument, but that like it's actually really difficult for like a band to go out on its own and like do this on its own, right? And one of the conclusions we came to was like Ticketmaster and like whoever else, Live Nation, like know what they're doing, like let them do what they want to do, let them do what they do well.
Yeah,
right. Like they have the resources, they have they have like the history of doing it, like let them do it, right? And I think that like that's the frustrating thing is that like because there's a counter argument to be made to what you're saying, is the sense that like well actually like it's in their best interest to keep people safe because then people won't want to go to their fucking like their shows or their raves or whatever if they're like constantly like having to wait in line for 5 hours. There's like gate crashing. People are dying. Like people will not want to go there. So it's almost kind of in their best interest. And also like it's also wild because if you actually are a Swiss financer, you have the capital or resources to actually make it safe. And that's the fucking crazy thing about it is that like I agree with what you're saying, but actually in some ways like they're the ones that are in the best fucking position to actually put the money towards making it safe and still making a huge profit, opposed to these sort of like what we have in Berlin, which is sort of like more, benevolent group of dedicated DIY communities that are just doing it more out of because they want to maintain a scene and less because they want to make a profit. I mean, obviously profit's important to maintain, but it's like less about that. And that works oftentimes more when it comes to like safety. It's fucking difficult.
Well, it's because they don't care, right? At some level. And again, it's about the interchangeability. They don't know they don't really like what the music. They don't respect the scene. They don't love the kids, right? There's also like the counter argument to what you said is the history of Avant Gardner, right? It's because it turns out that they have kept getting away with it, right? People have died of overdoses, there's rampant drug use. It's an unsafe environment. I mean, I don't know if they're responsible for the kidnappings, but like it's an unsafe. Though. I mean, like it's an unsafe environment in many ways. It seems like they consistently oversell shows, and like it's fine, and they make money, and they are able to expand into doing something like buying Izu. And the question is like I totally disagree, right? That like I think that there's people will. I think that the argument that consumers are ultimately going to be able to enforce their rights through the power of the marketplace, I don't think that's right, dude.
No. I think people will still go. Yeah, people.
You're right. Like saying like if they keep messing stuff up, yeah, people still go. Like I do think that's where you have to like. When people break like the safety laws, it's because it's the classic like short-term thinking versus long-term thinking of capitalism, right? Like we don't know the financial structures of these various clubs, so it's totally possible like the individual decision makers, their money is tied to stocks or their money is tied to various like they're planning to flip it in a couple of years or whatever, and so like actually they don't need to ensure the long-term viability of a community, they just need to ensure like short-term profitability. But also, I think there's the classic, like, you only need to have, like, one... You can have a lot of close calls, and it's all fine, and you only need to have something disastrous happen once, right? To, like, ruin people's lives. And, like, there's no interest... It's not in their interest to, like, keep making it safe if they, at some level, don't think that... There's no mechanism to enforce, like, the fact that like, oh, if an Astroworld happens, you go to jail for the rest of your life. Ticketmaster didn't even assume, Live Nation didn't assume any responsibility for Astroworld, right? So like, if something bad happened, there's no enforcement mechanism.
Yeah. So like, what's the whose responsibility is it?
Right. If you said if there's a crowd crush and someone gets killed, you, the owner of Avant Gardner, are going to go to jail for the rest of your life. I think that there'd be a lot more safety regulations.
Possibly. I mean, hard to say, but I think the overall thing is that there is, I mean, I don't know. No, because I don't know. I mean, like, I don't. Like, I mean, because that also feels like that falls into the idea of, like, if you kill somebody, like, you're going to go to jail. There's hella murders going on. So, I don't know. Like, I mean, that's a real morbid way of ending it. But, I mean, in the sense of, like, the threats, it's like, I don't know. I mean, like.
No, I know.
The cancel culture has made people a little bit more careful about, minding their P's and Q's, but it hasn't stopped sexual harassment. So, I mean, it hasn't stopped, like, these kind of things,
No, I know. But I guess what I'm saying, though, is I just feel like.
Well, it's the tension that exists right now. It's attention, right? Like you're getting billions of dollars being put into like clubbing. Like right now, like the International Music Summit said that like the global electronic music industry is valued at 11.3 billion versus like 8.7 billion in 2019. It's growing. It's huge. You see what's happening in New York. You see what's happening in Berlin. And like this is the tension. And like you have fortunately, I am for the checks and balances to keep people safe. And we've been talking about this. We talked about it with the Astroworld Travis Scott situation. But it's like, I don't know. Like it in the end, like the kids are gonna continue to want to go. Or we're all gonna want to go dancing, and like it becomes a consumer's choice, which is like completely unfair because it should be like there should be checks and balances being placed in to maintain the safety of people who just want to go and have a good time.
I got a little bit heated here, I think, because this research shook me, and it shook me because right, Astroworld literally just happened. And again, like, this could have gone, Izu could have gone way worse than it did. And it just made me feel like the set of like incentives around, like we're talking about safety, about profit, like haven't gotten realigned in a safer way or a more sustainable way. And in fact, as money that expects returns gets poured into dance music, as money that expects like everything to kind of work the same, which means it's detaching specific spaces from the kind of community norms, both like within dance music and the broader communities around it that like developed over time to encourage spaces. I just feel like this made me feel like it's the first in a number of kind of dangerous, like this felt like another like warning, like red warning flag that all the trends seem like it's pointing towards more danger and not less, even though we know how badly things can go wrong. Like all the incentives, yeah,
and we're just sounding the alarm. And like I don't know, if anything, like people who listen to this show and go clubbing, like consider your choices, I guess. I don't know. Like, you know, it's
no, I mean, or like
don't vote for Eric Adams. I mean, I don't know. That's an easy one. yeah. But no, I think it is a certain.
And there are clubs that are more communally or owned, and there are smaller clubs, right, that tend to have closer ties to the communities. No, but this is a grimmer watch this space than some of these are. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if the organizers, how pissed off the city government is about those 7,000 extra tickets.
Yeah, we'll keep an update on it. So we'll tie a bow on this one here. Thanks for listening. Music by Bird Language. Stay tuned for another episode that will be coming next week with David Turner, our new collaboration. Subscribe to our newsletter. Subscribe to Penny Fractions. And we'll see you soon. Bye.